Della Mae Hutchkins was a ghost in her own home. She learned to walk without making a sound, to exist without taking up space. Her mother's words were the knives that carved her into invisibility, each one a fresh cut about her weight, her worthlessness. Her father's silence was the heavy shroud that suffocated her, his eyes sliding past her as if she were a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of. In the small, forgotten town of Bitterwell, Della wasn't a daughter. She was a shame, a burden, a secret her family wished they could bury. So when a mountain of a man named Gage Morrison rode into town, his shadow stretching long and menacing down the dusty main street, her parents saw their chance. He was looking for help on his remote ranch, a place 20 miles from civilization, a place shrouded in rumor and fear. Gage was known as the Ox, a man who lived alone in the wilderness, a man some said had killed with his bare hands. Her parents didn't hesitate. They made a deal. They sold their own daughter. They sent her away with a man the whole town feared, thinking they were finally free of their burden. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The morning the deal was struck, the sun cast long shadows across Bitterwell, making the weathered buildings look like crooked teeth in a dying mouth. Inside the cramped Hutchkins house, Della stood at the kitchen window, her fingers tracing the worn spine of her grandmother's recipe book. It was the only kindness she'd ever known, its pages filled with careful handwriting that spoke of a love long gone. At 23, she was an expert at being small. "Della Mae!" Her mother's voice sliced through the quiet. "Stop daydreaming. Breakfast won't make itself." Della moved from the window, her worn boots silent on the wooden floor. She tied a faded apron around her waist and began to mix batter for flapjacks, her hands moving with quiet confidence. The kitchen was her sanctuary, the one place her existence had a purpose. Her grandmother's words, whispered 5 years ago on her deathbed, were a constant fading echo in her heart. "You're worth more than they'll ever see, child." But believing those words was like trying to hold on to smoke. Her father, Vernon, shuffled in, his thin frame draped in the same worn clothes he wore every day. He owned the general store, a business that kept them fed but never comfortable. His eyes, as always, skittered away from hers. "Coffee ready?" he asked the air. "Yes, Papa," Della murmured, pouring the dark liquid into his chipped mug, careful not to let their fingers touch. Even an accidental brush of skin seemed to pain him. Then Cordelia, her mother, swept in like a storm. Bitterness had carved deep lines around her eyes. She eyed the flapjacks with disdain. "I don't know why you insist on making so many," she sniffed, her gaze traveling pointedly over Della's fuller figure. "It's not as if we need the extra food around here." The daily ritual of shame had begun. Della's hands faltered for just a second over the hot griddle. She'd learned long ago that silence was her only shield. Responding only invited more cruelty. Outside, the town was coming to life. Mrs. Peaton, the kind widow next door, waved as she hung her laundry. Children laughed on their way to school. Normal people, living normal lives, unmarked by the shame that clung to Della like a second skin. Suddenly, a commotion from the street drew her attention. A small crowd was gathering near the saloon. And then she saw him. He dismounted from a horse so large it looked like a creature from a myth. The man himself was even bigger, nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders that could block out the sun. Gage Morrison, the Ox. The stories she'd heard whispered in the general store came rushing back. Lived alone. Rarely spoke. Could track a whisper across stone. Some said he was a killer. But as Della watched from the safety of her window, she saw something else. She saw the careful way he moved, as if he was afraid of his own size. She saw the gentle way he ran a hand along his horse's neck. She saw the respectful nod he gave a nervous woman who hurried past. It was the look of a man who held himself apart, who kept a practiced distance. She recognized it because she lived it every single day. It was the protective shell you build when the world has hurt you one too many times. "Afternoon, Morrison," she heard Sheriff Talbert say, his voice laced with cautious respect. "What brings you to town?" Gage's voice was deep and measured, carrying across the street. "Need to hire help for the ranch. Someone who can manage a household." Word spread like wildfire. Gage Morrison, looking for a housekeeper. A live-in position, 20 miles from anywhere, working for a man who terrified the town. It wasn't a job most women would be lining up for. But Della's mother, returning from a morning of gossip, saw it as something else entirely. She saw it as an opportunity, a solution, a way out. "Della May," Cordelia called from the front door, her voice holding an unfamiliar, dangerous lightness. "Come here. We have something important to discuss." Della's stomach clenched. Her mother only sounded pleasant when she was planning something awful. "I've just heard the most interesting news," Cordelia began, her eyes gleaming. "It seems Mr. Morrison is looking for household help. A live-in position. Good pay." Della waited, sensing the trap closing in. "Of course," her mother continued. "Most decent women wouldn't consider it. Living alone with a man of his reputation. But then, you're not most women, are you, dear?" The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a job offer. This was a disposal. "Mama, Don't interrupt," Cordelia snapped. "This is a chance for you to finally make yourself useful, to give your father and me the peace we deserve." The crushing weight of being unwanted was suddenly heavier than ever before. This wasn't just neglect. This was an active act of abandonment. They were casting her out. "I won't go," Della said, her own quiet voice surprising her. Cordelia stopped pacing and stared. "Excuse me?" "I won't go," Della repeated, a tiny flame of defiance flickering to life. "This is my home, too." Her mother's face hardened into something cruel and final. "You have no rights in this house, girl. You are a burden we have carried out of charity. If Gage Morrison is willing to pay for your services, then by God, you will provide them." Just then, the front door opened. Her father stood there, his face grave. "I've spoken with Morrison," Vernon announced, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He's agreed. Della leaves with him in the morning." The trap snapped shut. Her life in Bitterwell was over. She was being sent into the wilderness with a monster. But as the fear washed over her, a desperate thought followed. Maybe, just maybe, the unknown was better than the familiar cruelty of home. The next morning, the air bit with the promise of winter. Della stood in the doorway, clutching her grandmother's recipe book like a shield. Her entire life, 2 dresses, a worn shawl, a few undergarments, fit into a single battered carpet bag at her feet. 23 years, reduced to what she could carry in one hand. Gage Morrison waited in the street, a silent, imposing figure atop his massive horse. Her father approached him, holding a hastily written contract. The terms were simple. Della would work as housekeeper and cook in exchange for room, board, and $20 a month. But there was a catch. Half her wages would be sent directly back to her parents, as compensation for the burden of raising her. Gage read the paper, his face a mask of stone. "This says she gets $10 a month," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "That's correct," Vernon said, puffing out his chest. "A fair price for our investment in her." "Investment," Gage repeated the word slowly, as if tasting something foul. His gaze shifted from the paper to Vernon, then landed on Della. "And she agreed to this?" Vernon stiffened. "She's my daughter. I decide what's best for her." "She's a grown woman," Gage said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Seems to me she should have a say in the matter." Cordelia stepped forward, her face sharp with irritation. "Mr. Morrison, I assure you, Della is grateful for this opportunity. Aren't you, dear?" The warning in her mother's voice was unmistakable. All eyes turned to Della. She could refuse. She could stand her ground. But to what end? To remain in this house where she was hated? Or to step into the unknown? Away from the constant judgment, away from the mirror of her parents' disappointment. It wasn't a choice at all. "I'll go," she whispered. Gage nodded once, but his eyes stayed on her, searching her face. "You understand this is a hard life. Lonely, 20 miles from town." "I understand," she said. And she did. Loneliness was an old friend. Gage dismounted with a fluid grace that was surprising for a man his size. "We'll need supplies. The ride takes most of the day." Vernon, eager to be done with the transaction, stepped forward again. "About the wages." $20 a month, Gage interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "To her. Full amount. If you want compensation for raising your daughter, take it up with someone who gives a damn." Vernon's face flushed with humiliation, but he knew better than to argue with a man who could snap him in two. He just swallowed his pride and nodded. Gage turned to Della. "I'll wait while you say your goodbyes." Della looked at her parents. Her father stared at his boots. Her mother's face was a blank canvas, already practicing the story she would tell the neighbors. There were no hugs, no tears, no blessings. Just the cold finality of a problem being solved. "Goodbye, Mama, Papa." She picked up her bag. Just then, Mrs. Peaton appeared at her gate, her face creased with sorrow. "You take care of yourself, dear girl," she called softly. "Remember you're worth more than they've let you believe." The kindness nearly broke her. Della managed a grateful nod, turning away before the tears could fall. Gage helped her onto the wagon seat, his large hands surprisingly gentle. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. As the wagon rolled forward, she didn't look back. The life she was leaving wasn't worth a final glance. They rode through the waking town in silence. Past the general store, past the church, past all the ordinary places that had formed the cage of her small life. As they left the last building of Bitterwell behind, Gage finally spoke, his voice low. "You afraid?" The question was so direct it caught her off guard. "Yes," she admitted, "but not of you." He glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. "I'm afraid of failing," she confessed, the words spilling out. "Of proving once again that I'm not worth the trouble." Gage was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Fear keeps us careful," he said at last. "But don't let other people's opinions become your truth." He paused. "I know something about being judged for things you can't control." The wagon rolled on, carrying them away from the cruelty of Bitterwell and into a vast, unknown wilderness. Della clutched the recipe book a little tighter. Maybe the impossible was just another word for a new beginning. The wagon climbed into rolling hills that seemed to stretch forever. The world opened up, vast and wild, a stark contrast to the cramped confines of her parents' home. Here, the horizon was a promise, not a boundary. Gage drove with an easy competence, his hands gentle on the reins. He seemed to move with a constant, careful control, always aware of his own immense strength. After a few hours, he pulled the wagon to a halt beside a sparkling creek. "We'll rest here," he said, climbing down. He extended a hand to help her. She hesitated for a split second before placing her small hand in his. He was careful, ensuring she was steady on her feet before letting go. The simple courtesy was so foreign, it almost felt like a dream. While the horses drank, Della knelt by the creek, splashing the cool water on her face. The silence here was different. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of her home. It was a living quiet, filled with the whisper of wind and the murmur of water. "Gets lonely," Gage said, breaking the peace. He was checking the harnesses, his back to her. "Weeks, sometimes without seeing another soul." "Does that bother you?" she asked. He stopped his work. Used to think I preferred it that way, he admitted. Now, I'm not so sure. There were layers to his words, secrets she couldn't yet decipher. He was a puzzle, a man wrapped in solitude and rumor. As they rode on under the afternoon sun, her curiosity grew. He was nothing like the monster the townspeople described. "Why did you need a housekeeper?" she asked suddenly. "You seem capable of managing on your own." He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Ranch has grown," he finally said, his words slow and deliberate. "Too much for one person. House, meals, mending, all the work that keeps a place from falling into ruin." He paused, and his voice dropped lower. "Gets hard to remember why you're working so hard when there's no one to share it with." The raw honesty of his loneliness stunned her. It was a vulnerability her own father would have died before admitting. "I can do those things," she said simply. "My grandmother taught me." "Your grandmother was important to you," he observed, his perception sharp. "She was the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered," Della confessed, her throat tightening. "I understand that kind of loss," he said, and the quiet sadness in his voice told her he spoke from a deep personal pain. He pointed ahead, toward a low ridge. "Ranch is just beyond that. Home." As they crested the hill, the view stole her breath away. A sprawling log house with a wide porch and a stone chimney sat nestled in a green valley, surrounded by well-tended barns and corrals. Cattle dotted the pastures that stretched toward distant, snow-capped mountains. It was a paradise built from hard work and determination. "It's wonderful," she breathed. "Needs work," Gage said, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "House has been empty too long, pantries bare, gardens overgrown." The prospect of the work didn't daunt her. It excited her. This was a place where her skills would have value, where her efforts would be seen. As they drew closer, her eyes fixed on the garden. Even neglected, she could see the bones of what was once a masterpiece. Tomato vines clung to broken stakes, heavy with ripe fruit. Pumpkins sprawled through the weeds. The air was scented with wild sage and thyme. "Someone put a lot of love into that garden," she said. Gage's hands tightened on the reins. "My wife," he said, his voice thick. "She had a way with growing things." Had. The word hung in the air. This ranch, so full of life, was also a monument to a profound loss. He was a man living in the ghost of a life built for a family. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her small bag inside. The house was dusty, but spacious and well built. He lit lamps, filling the main room with a warm golden light. "Your room is upstairs," he said, leading the way. It was a large, comfortable room with a proper bed, a washstand, and a lock on the inside of the door. A simple detail that spoke volumes about his character. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said, his voice gentle. "Cold beef and bread in the kitchen when you're ready." Alone in her new room, Della sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. For the first time, she had a space that was truly her own. A sanctuary. She unpacked her few belongings, placing the recipe book on the table by the window. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight, she felt an unfamiliar emotion creeping into her heart. It felt a lot like hope. Della woke to sunlight and the distant lowing of cattle. She went downstairs to a kitchen that was dusty but well equipped. Coffee was already warming on the stove. Another small, thoughtful kindness from the man she could see outside, working patiently with a horse in the corral. The pantry was nearly bare, holding only the staples of a man merely surviving, not truly living. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time Gage came inside, the kitchen was transformed. Surfaces gleamed and the air was filled with the scent of fresh biscuits, frying bacon, and hot coffee. He stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. Smells good, he said, a note of surprise in his voice. She placed a heaping plate of food in front of him. He ate with the slow appreciation of a man who hadn't tasted a home-cooked meal in a long, long time. This is excellent, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Been a long time. The simple praise warmed her more than any flowery compliment could have. I found your wife's garden, she said carefully, watching his face. With your permission, I'd like to try bringing it back. Pain flickered in his eyes. Haven't been able to touch it, he admitted quietly. Seemed wrong, changing what she built. I wouldn't change it, Della assured him. Just tend it. Honor what she started. He looked at her then, a long, searching look. You understand about loss? He stated. It wasn't a question. Loss is what taught me to value the good things when I find them, she replied. Later that day, while cleaning Gage's study, she found it. Tucked away in a desk drawer, face down, was a small silver photograph frame. She lifted it to dust, and her heart stopped. The woman in the picture was lovely, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was holding a small boy, no older than 4, who had his father's dark hair. And behind them stood Gage, his massive hands resting on his wife's shoulders, his harsh features transformed by a look of pure, unadulterated happiness. The man in the photograph was a stranger. The careful, isolated man she knew was just a shadow of the person he used to be. Whatever happened here didn't just take his family. It took his soul. Footsteps on the stairs startled her. She tried to slide the frame back into the drawer, but it was too late. Gage stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on her guilty face. You saw it, he said, his voice flat. Yes, she whispered. They were beautiful. Your family. He walked to the desk and picked up the photograph, his hand trembling slightly. Caroline and Thomas, he said, his voice barely a whisper. My wife and son. The silence was heavy with grief. Fever took them, he continued, his voice breaking. 3 years ago. 1 week they were fine, laughing and planning Christmas. The next I was burying them both. Tears stung Della's eyes. I'm so sorry. Built this place for them, he choked out, setting the photo back in the drawer. Sometimes I wonder why I keep it going. What's the point of all this without someone to share it with? They would want you to be happy, she said softly. My grandmother used to say the best way to honor someone is to keep living the kind of life that would have made them proud. For the first time since she'd met him, a genuine smile touched Gage's lips. Caroline would have liked you, he said. She always said the measure of a person isn't what they've been given, but what they do with it. That night, looking across the table at his face, relaxed and free of its usual weariness, Della dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, 2 broken people could find a way to make each other whole again. The week settled into a comfortable rhythm. Della woke to Gage's quiet morning chores, to fresh coffee, and a respectful, "Morning, Miss Della," that made her feel seen and valued. The neglected house bloomed under her care, and the garden began to thrive once more. She was exploring the property one afternoon when she found them. On a small rise overlooking the valley, beneath a sprawling oak tree, were 2 simple wooden crosses. Caroline Morrison, beloved wife and mother. Thomas Morrison, precious son. The graves were immaculately tended. Wildflowers had been planted around the borders, and small stones spelled out a single phrase between them. Together always. Gage had been coming here, quietly tending this sacred space, keeping their memory alive. He was a man drowning in a grief so profound he'd built a fortress of solitude around his heart. Figured you'd find it eventually. Gage's voice came from the edge of the clearing. He stood with his hat in his hands, his face a mask of sorrow. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. Not intruding, he said, moving to stand beside her. I talk to them sometimes. Suppose that makes me seem touched in the head. It makes you seem human, she replied gently. Love doesn't end just because life does. He told her about his son, just learning to talk, about his wife, teaching him his letters. He told her how they died within hours of each other. Left me wondering why I was the one left behind, he said, his voice thick with a survivor's guilt she knew all too well. Sometimes, she said softly, the people left behind are meant to do something important. You built this place. You care for it. You saw someone who needed help and you offered it. Taking you in wasn't charity, he said, shaking his head. I needed the help. You could have hired anyone, she insisted, but you chose someone the whole town saw as worthless. Maybe you recognized something familiar. The words hung between them, a truth they were both just beginning to understand. They were two people the world had discarded, finding value in each other. That evening, as she prepared dinner, the sound of unfamiliar horses sent a jolt of alarm through her. 3 rough-looking men were dismounting near the corral, their eyes sweeping over the ranch with a cold, calculating interest. Gage came out of the barn, his body instantly tense. These weren't neighbors. This was trouble. The men claimed to be cattle buyers, but their questions were too specific, their eyes too shifty. They were scouting, cataloging weaknesses. When they finally rode off, Gage came inside, his face grim. Trouble? She asked. Probably, he said, checking the locks on the door and windows. Those weren't cattle buyers. They were rustlers. There's been talk of a gang hitting the isolated ranches. He turned to her, his expression serious. Della, this could get dangerous. If you want to go back to town? No. The word was out before she could think. If there's trouble, you'll need help. I'm not running away. He studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. It was respect. This isn't your fight, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is my home now, she said, her voice steady. I'm not letting anyone take it without a fight. A slow smile spread across his face, the first she'd seen that held no sadness. In that case, he said, his voice a low growl, we'd better prepare for war. 3 weeks later, Gage returned from a trip to town earlier than expected. There was a nervous excitement in his movements she'd never seen before. He held out a package wrapped in brown paper. I thought you might like this, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. She unwrapped it to find the most beautiful dress she had ever seen, a deep blue wool with delicate embroidery. It was the kind of dress that said the wearer was cherished, valued, loved. Gage, she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. I can't. You've been working so hard, he said, shifting uncomfortably. Thought you deserved something nice? The kindness of it shattered her composure. No one has ever, she began, unable to finish. No one's ever given you a dress? He asked, a quiet anger in his voice, not at her, but at the family who had failed her so completely. No one's ever given me anything that said I was worth caring about, she sobbed. His face softened. You're worth a great deal more than a dress, he said quietly. But I wanted you to have something that showed how much I value what you've brought to this place. The hesitation was tiny, but she heard it. He'd almost said something else. Then his expression grew serious again. There's news from town. The Miller Ranch was hit 2 nights ago. Lost 30 head of cattle. The rustlers are getting bolder. We're probably next. That afternoon, he taught her to shoot. He was a patient teacher, and she was a quick study. You're a natural, he said with approval as she put 3 shots in a row into a distant tin can. Steady hands. That evening, they sat on the porch, the silence comfortable between them. She wore her new dress, the soft wool a constant reminder of his thoughtfulness. Do you ever think about the future? she asked quietly. After this is over? Used to think the future was something that happened to other people, he admitted. Lately, I've been wondering. What changed your mind? She asked. He turned to look at her, his gaze intense in the twilight. Company, he said simply. It's amazing how different everything looks when there's someone else to consider. The unspoken words hung in the air between them, a fragile, beautiful thing. They'll come soon, he said, his voice growing grim again. But I want you to know, whatever happens, these past weeks have been the closest thing to happiness I've known in 3 years. Nothing is going to happen to you, she said fiercely. I won't let it. He smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. Caroline used to say the same thing. Maybe she couldn't stop it, Della said, standing and placing a hand on his shoulder. But I can shoot a rifle, and I'm not going anywhere. He looked up at her, and in his eyes, she saw the flicker of a hope he thought had died long ago. But first, they had to survive the coming storm. The next morning dawned gray and cold. An unspoken tension hung in the air. Gage had left for his morning rounds before she came downstairs, which was unusual. While reaching for flour in the pantry, her elbow knocked a loose board in the wall. It shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Curiosity 1. Inside, she found a leather portfolio. Her hands trembled as she untied the string. The first thing she saw was a yellowed wanted poster. Wanted, dead or alive. Gabriel Stone, former U.S. Marshal, $5,000 reward. The face staring back at her was Gage's. Younger, leaner, but unmistakably him. Gabriel Stone, not Gage Morrison, a lawman, a wanted murderer. Her world tilted on its axis. She dug deeper, finding a marshal's badge, newspaper clippings about the deaths of 3 notorious criminals, all killed while in Marshal Stone's custody. And at the bottom, a faded handwritten letter. My dearest Gabriel, it began. By the time you read this, Thomas and I will be gone. The fever. Please know it wasn't your fault. Those men came after our family because of your badge. You did what you had to do. Don't let their deaths be your life sentence. Live, my love. Find a way to be happy again. Yours, Caroline. Della sank into a chair, her mind reeling. The fever hadn't been random. It had been murder. He hadn't just lost his family. They had been taken from him. He had faked his own death, changed his name, and hidden himself away from the world, not just in grief, but in fear. The sound of hoofbeats sent a fresh wave of panic through her. The door opened. Gabriel, Gage, stepped inside. He took one look at her face, at the papers on the table, and he froze. How long have you known? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. About 5 minutes, she replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. Gabriel Stone, former U.S. Marshal. He sank into the chair across from her, the weight of his secrets finally crushing him. Are you afraid of me now? The question cut through her shock. Was she afraid of this man? This kind, gentle, broken man who had shown her nothing but respect? This man who had defended her, valued her, shared his deepest pain with her? No, she said firmly, but I need to understand. He told her everything. About the gang of criminals the law couldn't touch. About how he'd taken justice into his own hands. About their associates who swore revenge. They came after Caroline and Thomas to get to me, he said, his voice breaking. My family died because I tried to protect other families. They brought the fever to my house deliberately. Infected blankets. The sheer evil of it stole her breath. So you became Gage Morrison, she whispered. Had to disappear. Thought if I stayed isolated, maybe I could just fade away. He looked up, his eyes full of regret. But then you came here, and for the first time in 3 years, I remembered what it felt like to have a reason to live. A sudden, terrible realization struck her. The rustlers, she breathed. They're not just cattle thieves, are they? His face went pale. I was hoping I was wrong, but I think they found me. They found Gabriel Stone, she clarified. Yes, which means they've brought the danger here. To you. He stood abruptly, his face a mask of anguish. Della, you have to leave. Now. I'll take you back to town. No, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. You don't understand these men. They enjoy causing pain. Then we'll make sure they don't get the chance, she declared, standing to face him. You said it yourself, I'm a good shot. I am not some helpless girl. I'm a woman who has found her home, and I'm not giving it up without a fight. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. You'd risk your life for a man who's been lying to you? You didn't lie about the things that matter, she said, stepping closer. Gage Morrison is a good man who saved me. Gabriel Stone was a good man who protected the innocent. Same man, same heart. His expression hardened, the weary rancher replaced by the determined lawman he once was. All right, he said quietly. Then we make our stand. Because they're coming. And when they do, they're going to find out Gabriel Stone isn't as dead as they thought. As dusk fell, they turned the house into a fortress. Gabriel methodically checked every weapon, his old marshal's badge glinting on the table. He was no longer a man in hiding. He was a warrior preparing for battle. They'll come at night, he said, not looking up from cleaning his rifle. Probably 6 or 7 of them. The leader is a man named Cutter Donovan, brother of one of the men I killed. He's smart, patient, and completely without conscience. He won't just want to kill me. He'll want to make me suffer first. The implication was clear. They would use her to get to him. There's one more thing, Gabriel said, pulling out the deed to the ranch. He signed it over, his careful script transferring ownership to her. Gabriel, no. Yes? He insisted. If something happens to me tonight, I want to know you have a home. A place that's truly yours. The gesture was so selfless it broke her heart. Nothing is going to happen to you, she said fiercely. Maybe not, he said, his voice soft. But I want you to know. These past months, you brought light back into a very dark place, Stella. You made me remember how to hope. Before she could answer, the sound of horses cut through the evening quiet. Gabriel peered through a crack in the boarded-up windows. 7 of them, he said grimly. They're here. A voice called out from the darkness. Gabriel Stone, we know you're in there. Time to settle accounts. I owe nothing to murderers, Gabriel roared back. You killed my brother, you bastard! Donovan screamed. Your brother died because he drew on a lawman! Ride away now and live! A harsh laugh echoed across the yard. Big words from a dead man! We've got you surrounded! Gabriel turned to Della, his face set. They'll rush us soon. When the shooting starts, stay low and keep moving. He reached out and touched her hand. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I love you. I was afraid to say it, afraid of losing someone else I cared about. The words she'd barely dared to dream of, spoken in the shadow of death. I love you too, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Which is why we are both going to survive this. Last chance, Stone, Donovan yelled. Send out the woman and we'll make your death quick. Over my dead body, Gabriel bellowed, the fury of a man who had already lost one family and would die before losing another. That can be arranged, came the chilling reply. Gabriel cocked his rifle. Here they come. Della moved to her window, her hand steady on her own rifle. They thought they were coming for a broken man and a worthless woman. They were about to find out they had kicked a hornet's nest. The first gunshot split the night, and the world exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness from 3 directions at once. Gabriel's rifle answered with deadly precision, and one of the attackers fell. Della's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. Her first shot went wide, but her second found its mark, dropping a man trying to circle the house. "Well done!" Gabriel yelled over the gunfire. Glass shattered. Wood splintered around her. She stayed low, moving from window to window as he taught her. Then came Donovan's furious voice. "Burn them out!" The smell of smoke filled the air. Her blood ran cold. Fire. Orange flames began to lick at the walls of the barn. Suddenly, new hoofbeats. More men. Her heart sank. But as they came into the firelight, she saw it wasn't more of Donovan's gang. It was her parents. And Sheriff Talbert. They'd seen the fire from town. The unexpected arrival threw the attackers into confusion. "Della!" Her mother shrieked, and for the first time in her life, Della heard raw, genuine fear in Cordelia's voice. The irony was staggering. The parents who had cast her out were now riding into a firefight to save her. "I'm here, Mama!" she called back. The odds had shifted. Now Donovan's men were caught between the fortified house and the sheriff's position on the road. Della's next shot took down another man. She was a warrior, defending her home, defending her love. Then, more riders. Federal marshals, their badges glinting. Help had arrived. Donovan, realizing it was over, let out a desperate final roar of fury. "If I can't have you stoned, she dies tonight!" He burst through the smoke, guns blazing, his eyes fixed on Della. Time slowed. She raised her rifle. Her shot hit his shoulder, spinning him, but he kept coming. Gabriel's rifle boomed beside her, and Donovan stumbled. Still, he charged forward, fueled by pure hatred. "You killed my brother!" he screamed, raising his pistol at Della. Gabriel threw himself in front of her. The bullet meant for her slammed into his chest. He collapsed, but even as he fell, his own final shot found its mark. Cutter Donovan fell backward into the dirt, dead before he hit the ground. "Gabriel!" Della dropped to her knees, pressing her hands against the wound, blood seeping through her fingers. "Stay with me! Don't you dare leave me!" Outside, the fight was over. The marshals were rounding up the survivors. Gabriel's eyes found hers. He managed a weak smile. "Did we win?" "We won," she sobbed. "You have to be fine. Della May." Her mother stood in the doorway, her face pale with shock. Behind her were her father and the sheriff. "How bad is he?" the sheriff asked, kneeling beside them. "Bullet went clean through," he assessed. "Missed the lung. He's stubborn." "Too stubborn to die," Gabriel rasped. "When I finally found something to live for." The lead federal marshal, a man named Hayes, stepped inside. "Gabriel Stone," he said, his voice full of respect. "Heard you were dead." "Circumstances changed," Gabriel managed. Hayes's eyes moved to Della. "Ma'am, I understand you played a significant role." "I protected my home," she said simply. "And the man I love." Hayes nodded. "There have been developments, Stone. The governor reviewed your case. The charges have been dropped. You're a free man." Gabriel stared in disbelief. Just then, Cordelia stepped forward. "Della," she said, her voice trembling. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about everything." Her father stepped up beside her. "We came to take you home," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "But I see you already are." 6 months later, spring had painted the valley in brilliant color. Della stood before the mirror, adjusting her wedding dress. The frightened girl who had left Bitterwell was gone. In her place was a confident, proud woman who knew her own worth. Her mother entered the room, her face soft. "You look beautiful, dear." She handed Della a small velvet box. Inside was her grandmother's gold locket. "Your father kept it for you," Cordelia said, waiting for the right moment. They were married in the garden, beneath the oak tree where Caroline and Thomas rested. It was a new beginning, blessed by the past. Delmare Hutchkins, Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke his vows. You saved my life in ways I didn't even know I needed saving. You showed me that the heart can heal. Gabriel Stone, she replied, her own voice strong and clear. You gave me a place to belong. You saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. As the sun set, they stood on the porch, arm in arm, looking out over the life they had fought for and won. The woman who was once a ghost had found her voice. The man who had hidden from the world had found his way back into the light. Together, they had discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most broken of places, and that being unwanted by the wrong people is the first step toward being cherished by the right one. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments what your favorite moment was. And don't forget to subscribe, because the stories we have coming up next are some of the most shocking ones yet. You won't want to miss them.